Hi, welcome to the Level 1 online webinar. I'm Ian White. I'm going to be with you for these 8 sessions where I'm going to talk to you and show you and share with you everything that I've been working in for the last 35 years around the bush essences for these ones we're going to be covering in this view. So for those who have never come in contact with me before, I'll give you a little bit of background how I came to be involved in working with the bush essences. And initially it's probably the family connection. I'm a 5th generation Australian herbalist, and if we go to my family connection, my great-great-grandmother, she was of English Norwegian background. She came to Australia in the 1850s when Australia had a gold rush, similar to the one in California. But she came to work as a herbalist on the goldfields. And you could imagine all the various maladies, from mines collapsing, malnutrition, alcohol, etc., that she had quite a lot of patients to be working on. Now, my great-grandmother, along with my grandmother, were some of the first white people to look at the medicinal properties of Australian plants. And I grew up in a suburb called Terry Hills. Now, if you've never been to Sydney or Australia, it's about an hour out from the centre of the city. Now, the advantage of the property was it backed onto National Park, and that was my playground as a boy. And, you know, both my great-grandmother and my grandmother were herbalists, and I spent a lot of time in the bush with my grandmother. We lived next door. I had to climb down the cliff to get to her property, or we could go down a dirt road to get to her. And we did a lot of bushwalking. I'd help her make up the herbal extracts and the tinctures. And on the bushwalk, she would point out the various plants and talk about the healing quality to me. So from a very early age, I got an appreciation that in the bush there are all these plants of healing qualities. And I've had much greater time, fun, and good times with my grandmother than what I was enjoying at school. So, you know, I was able to convince my parents, although I'd wait till my father had gone off to work. My mother was a softer touch, and I'd be doubled up in pain, going to her, pleading that I wanted to go to school. And she said, "Oh no, you're far too sick, you better spend the day with your grandmother." And then I'd be out in the bush, and you know, she was very happy to have my company, and you know, we'd spend a lot more time doing fun things for me. When my mum came to pick me up, she'd ask, "How did I go?" And my grandmother said, "Oh, gradually he got better during the day." And so I got to spend a lot of good quality time with my grandmother and learning a lot about the plants. Now, the downside was that my mother was convinced that I had some tumour growing in my abdomen because I was in so much pain all the time. She took me to, I think, to every gastrointestinal specialist in Macquarie Street, which is the main street for medical specialists in Sydney. And each one wanted to do a barium enema meal, gave me all this white glunk just to swallow, and then do the x-rays. It's probably a wonder that my intestines function at all today. In fact, I did confess to my mother probably about 15 years ago that I never really was sick, and she was quite mortified by that. But for me, it was worth it just to be out in the bush and learning a lot I could from my grandmother. Now, I mentioned my dad. He was a pharmacist. But if you went to his pharmacy, not only would you get all your prescriptions done, but if you went in with a stomach upset, then you get a herbal mix or lung problems. But he was more versed in traditional European, North American herbs, your echinacea and mints and things like that, rather than the native plants which my grandmother and great-grandmother were specializing in. And one of the great tragedies was that the early Aboriginal knowledge was lost. You know, influenza, smallpox, etc. wiped out the indigenous population very quickly in many areas. And theirs was an oral tradition where all this knowledge about the plants was just passed down verbally. Nothing was written down. So that knowledge was lost. And I was only about 9 when my grandmother, who was traveling in Europe, she got separated from her luggage. Now, unbeknown to the rest of the family, she was really riddled with cancer. She was a very heavy smoker, but she kept the cancer at bay. Even before I was born, she had the cancer with various herbs, but which were lost when her luggage was mislaid. And she contacted my dad, and he had to try and get all the herbs to her and wait for the right flowering times and then send it across. Unfortunately, by the time it arrived, her luggage had never turned up. The stress of traveling, being without the herbs, she went into a coma and was flown back to Australia, but never really came out of that coma. So for the second time, all that knowledge was lost. My great-grandmother rather was already passed over at that point. So for me, it's not like each plant, I remember what the qualities and healing qualities were. More that in the bush, there are all these plants with very strong healing qualities. And if you're listening from outside of Australia, when I refer to the bush, in Australia, that means wilderness area, not small little shrubs of a certain height or anything else like that. So I went on, I was doing university, I was doing a science degree, and the good thing about university is long holidays, and I decided I'd go traveling in India. Unfortunately, in India I had what's considered to be a Mack truck experience. So at that time, I got very sick. I broke up with my girlfriend, I'd been in a identity crisis, I was on the road with all these seasons travelers, I had no idea where I was going on and traveling in my life. And I think it just got all too much for me and body decided I had enough too, and I got very bad dysentery. When I came back home ready to resume university, I was skinny little arms and legs, pot belly, not looking very good at all. I didn't have very much energy. My parents were a bit horrified by what they saw, so their approach was give me 3 hot meals a day to put all the weight I'd lost back on. Unfortunately, I didn't have the energy to burn it off. So, again, another 6-7 weeks later, I still had skinny arms, legs, and a slightly bigger pot belly. It was at that point I decided I need to take charge of my own health and well-being. I started doing yoga, Tai Chi, which led on to meditation. I started working with natural remedies, especially herbal medicine, rebuilding my health. And that really ignited a passion within me. And I decided I'm going to try and combine that with my science degree. And I think I got to my final year. And by that time, I realized that all the things I was more interested in were natural therapy. So I started studying naturopathy full-time while I finished off my degree. And the good thing was I was able to do anatomy and physiology at university where I had better facilities. And it was during that time when I was doing my naturopathy that I got exposed for the first time the concept of flower essences. And I was very excited because here was a system that anyone could use, was safe, without side effects. And I think when I graduated, I was predominantly a homeopath. And I then had a very good friend of mine. I'd shared a house with him when I was a student. He was a very charismatic fellow, very successful in all areas of his life, business, etc. And he came to me, and this is when my practice was already established, and he said, look, I've been diagnosed with bowel cancer. I'm going to go back to the next state from where he came from to have surgery there and recuperate with his family. Now, this was a man who'd grown up on an organic farm as well, so it was a complete shock to me and our mutual friends that of all people, he would be the one with such a serious illness. And because of my background with meditation, he asked if I would hold a healing circle for him the night before they operated. And, I was only too happy to be of service to him in that way. All our mutual friends came to my house the night before they operated. And, there was some prayer, directing energy, visualizing Jim recovering. Unfortunately, the next day when he went into surgery, the doctors found that the cancer spread throughout his whole body, and there was, nothing that they could do for him. And they advised him when he recovered from the surgery that, he only really had a couple of months left to live. So I decided I would continue that healing circle every week for Jim. And he was a very gracious man. He said, look, don't restrict it to me. Open up to anyone who needs healing. So every week we do the healing circle at my house. Again, similar thing. There'd be prayer, meditation, directing energy. Now, Jim died about 6 months later. And shortly after his death, in the meditations, I started getting pictures of plants, told where to go and make them up, and what the healing qualities were. And what I thought was a very nice touch was that if I was unfamiliar with the plant, there'd be a little caption underneath with the botanic name so I could do some research. And they were very specific where the plants had to be made. So sometimes I'd go, oh, okay, flannel flower. Well, I've never seen flannel flower growing in that region where they're directing me to go to. And yet when I'd go there, the whole hillside, for example, we covered in flannel flowers. So they were very precise in what they want to do. Now, for me at that point, meditations was more of an inner knowing, a gut feeling coming through. I'm not an overly visual person. However, it was very bright and vibrant. And as clear as some of the slides we've already looked at with the flowers. Now, what really helped with this, it was my practice was already established. I already had patients I was working with. And I must admit, at that time I was doing my homeopathy, I was also prescribing English flower essences. And I thought, why isn't someone working with Australian plants? Having, that legacy from my grandmother, being in the bush with her, knowing of all the plants that she knew about, and also the potency of the bush. No one was, so, I was quite content to keep using them. I used to run courses on them. I must admit I was a little bit disappointed because sometimes I had what I thought was the right English remedy. But when my patients would come back after being on them, say, for a month, they couldn't really tell if anything had shifted or changed. So when I started making up the Australian bush essences, I'd give it to my patients. I found that rather than having to give it 4 times a day for a month, as I had been with the other system from England, I was able to use it just morning and night and say for a 2-week period. And patients were coming back really clearly observing shifts and changes. So for the next 2 years, I was out in the bush all the time. I was getting a lot of information through. Any spare moment was off out in the bush, photographing, researching, tuning in, meditating with the plants. And I was getting such great results. I decided I would share that information with some of my other colleagues who I was quite friendly with, some naturopaths, herbalists. There was a couple of acupuncturists and doctors who I gave the remedies to for them to use it on their patients. Could they replicate the results that I was getting? So, for the next 2 years, just gathering all this information, the results other people were getting were very good. Now, at that time, I felt that because the remedies were being made in Australia, they were really just for Australian people. And after that 2-year period, I started publishing information. And people got to know the essences in other countries. And I had requests coming in from various parts of Europe, United States, from Brazil, asking if they could import the bush essences into their countries. And the feedback I started getting was equal to the results I was getting with people taking the remedies here in Australia. There was a real potency. And shortly we'll look at what some of the qualities in Australia that would lead to the remedies working so quickly and so deeply. In fact, worldwide they've got a reputation for exactly that, being incredibly quick, very powerful and deep acting. And when people were getting great results in other countries, it made me aware that really this planet's like a global village, that something that's working well coming from Australia can equally have the similar benefits if someone's in Japan or they're in Turkey or in France. Okay? Now, also what I've noticed, a lot of the flowers coming through were, there was no equivalent in any other country, and there's still not. In one of the future sessions, we'll be looking at Mulla Mulla, for example, incredibly deep-acting one. Now, back in Bach's time, there was no computers, electromagnetic radiation wasn't very prominent, and you didn't have any nuclear energy. All of those things are having a huge impact in our environment, especially, with the rolling out of 5G, for example. So what I've noticed over the years, and I've been working with the bush essences for over 35 years now, is that when there's a need in society, essences will come down to meet that need. And, society is markedly different from when, say, the English flower essences were made. But we'll talk about that very shortly. So, and also that, from that 35 years ago, the essences coming through dealing with more basic emotional states, self-esteem, anger, grief, right? Anxiety. Now, as time went on, I think more of a spiritual range of remedies started coming through, which is again very pertinent to our times. Now, I've mentioned a little bit about the bush essence. They've been around for, over 35 years now. And I mentioned an English system. But how long do flower essences go back in time? The earliest recorded use of flower essences goes back 3,500 years ago to Egypt. There are records on papyrus of collecting the dew of flowers to treat emotional imbalances. Now, if we go to Europe, the earliest recorded uses in Europe go back to the 12th century. And there was a woman called Hildegard von Bingen. A few years ago, she was officially sanctified as a saint in the Catholic Church. Now, she was born in 1098 in Germany, and in the town of Bingen, which is today it's about an hour's driving west of Frankfurt. And as a young girl, she was put into the monastery, and in her diary she recorded how she would have gold light coming to her forehead, and she was getting all this information. She was classified while she was alive as a prophet by the Catholic Church. And we would today, she's just getting, her third eye is being activated. But that's how she described it. And she was a very important figure. She lived during the course of 10 different popes. And in that information coming through, she brought through information on music. And her music is still played today. In fact, in one of the future sessions, we're going to do a flower meditation, and we're going to have some of Hildegard von Bingen's music being played. She brought through a lot of information about education, and she championed that women should be treated equally to men. Now, back in that time, especially with education, girls weren't educated, and she was training all the nuns in the monastery as well. And she got through a lot of information on herbal medicine, which is still used today by many practitioners, following her advice and recommendations. But she also brought through the information about the flower essences. And she would have the nuns lay muslin sheets out overnight on the flowers. In the morning, they would collect the muslin sheets, which had absorbed the dew of the flowers. They would wring the sheets out, collecting the dew. And they would use that to treat emotional imbalances. And if someone was very ill, they would wrap them in the wet muslin sheets, getting hydrotherapy. And this is her modern monastery. The original one, which we've got a few images of, was sacked by the Swedes when they invaded Germany in the 1600s. And this was the modern one. And, you know, I've been to this one. I've been there when it was on Hildegard von Bingen's birthday. And all the nuns in her order came out chronologically. So the oldest one came out, she was in her 80s, followed by the very end, a young novice who was 18, all singing Hildegard von Bingen's music. I just had goosebumps everywhere. It was a magnificent occasion to be there on her birthday. She would have been quite old, being born in 1098, she'd still been around. Now, in the local church, her monasteries and mosaics are still there. And in this image, you can see down the bottom her casket, which very much the Catholic Church's tradition for their saints and very significant people to have relics of their skeleton, etc., being stored there. And this is an image of Hildegard in the monastery. I'm not sure if they had any drawings of her to be accurate, so no photographs back then. And this is the casket where I said some of her relics are kept. And this is in the town of Bingen. She's Hildegard of Bingen. Now this is the older monastery, the original one. And I've been there a couple of times. It's got wonderful energy. And if you ever get the opportunity, I'd highly recommend going there. You know, when you do a meditation, it's like you get transported. There's some of the shots there, original stonework. It's quite wonderful to be wandering around knowing, oh, here was the vegetable garden and here was some of the other flower gardens where the muslin sheets were laid out overnight. And it was just like, this was the very history of flower essences, you know, in the Western world. And you know, there's the original altar. They knew where that was. In fact, I got a message just before going back the second time. You know, and it feels like it was a real message coming through that lineage of Hildegard von Bingen. They told me to go to the altar, and I would find a gift there from Hildegard for me in my essence making. And when I went there, I found I was drawn to two different stones. A large one, which for using for essences made in Australia, and a smaller one, like if I was making up, say, the Divine Presence or the White Light essences. So I really felt nice to have that connection. And later on today, I'll be talking about how the essences are made, and I'll mention Hildegard again at that time. There's me at the altar. It felt nice knowing that Hildegard had been right in this very spot. Now, the next very important person who championed the cause of flower essences was Paracelsus. Now, he was born in the late 15th century, and a very famous figure in medicine. He really was the one who came forward and changed the perception of how the body worked according to the ancient Greeks. Yeah. One of the other things he brought through, and he was a lecturer in the universities of teaching medicine throughout Europe, was that he brought forward this ancient term called the doctrine of signatures. And this is where the shape, the colour, and the location of the plant are clues nature gives to the healing quality of the plants. And when we come to look at each of the individual bush essences, I'm going to show you how relevant that doctrine of signatures is. And just to give you an example, I was teaching in Canada one time, Bush Essence Workshop, and one of the practitioners there who was attending was a herbalist, knew my background in herbal medicine, and took me down the back from where we were teaching, and it was a real boggy, swampy area. Wanted to show me lungwort. Now, growing there also was skunk cabbage, both plants used for the lungs. Now, if you think of the lungs, moist tissue, and here was all this boggy, wet area, and that's where the plants were growing, which were treating the lungs. So, again, the colour. Waratah, when we look at it shortly, it's beautiful red. It's like the heart. So the colour, the shape, and the location are all clues to that healing quality. That's called the doctrine of signatures. So Paracelsus championed that, really made it very important herbal medicine. Unfortunately today, a lot of people studying herbal medicine don't get taught the doctrine of signatures, yet it's remained in flower essences a very vital point for helping to understand the quality of the flower. So, as I mentioned, getting information through meditation, but also when I've got that initial information, I'll be sitting with the plant. I'll be doing a lot of observation. And I found that through my work with numerology for the last 35 years, I studied that at the same time I was doing my naturopathy. Okay, this one's got 3 petals. Well, this has got 4 stamens. So the significance through numerology has also helped me to understand and reveal those healing qualities of the flowers. Now, it wasn't just in Europe and Egypt where the understanding of flower essences was known and incorporated. In Australia, Indigenous people for centuries had been working with the emotional healing quality of the flowers. In fact, when the first white settlers came to Australia in 1788, they noticed, and they record in their diaries, when the Aborigines were sick, they would float waratahs in water, and then they would drink that water. Now, they would do that. They would also eat the flowers. And if a flower was inedible, and we'll be looking, in a few weeks' time with Old Man Banksia. You break all your teeth if you tried to eat that. It's got a very hard centre. So what the Australian Aborigines would do, they would sit a person, if they need the healing quality of Old Man Banksia, around the base of the tree to take in and absorb the energy of the flowers. Now, eating the flowers, they knew they were getting nutrition, but they were also getting, again, that emotional healing quality of the flowers. And it's not just in Australia. What we found that Indigenous people in South America, in India, throughout the Pacific, Japan, all were working with flowers treating emotional imbalances. In fact, in Brazil, they were very specific in the type of water that they were using to float the flowers on. So if they were working with a flower that helped deal with violent emotions, anger, rage, they would collect water from a thunderstorm to float that flower in to prepare the flower essence. Okay. If they were dealing with a very old emotional pattern that person had had for many years, they would collect water from a deep well or lake to use to put the relevant flower in. Now, in India, there are still many parts of that country where for 40 days after the birth, a woman will take a bath late in the evening, the new mother. And certain flowers are placed on the water in the morning. The sun is releasing that vibrational quality into the water. The flowers are discarded towards dusk which is when the woman bathes in that flower. And it's designed, that particular process, to realign both her emotional and physical body after giving birth. Now, back in 1992, I hosted the third International Flower Essence Conference. The first one was in France in 1990. A good friend of mine, Sabina Pettit from Canada, hosted the second one there in Vancouver Island. So when we did our international conference back in 1992, I had 2 Aboriginal elders to open up the conference. One of them was from Western Australia, and as a young boy, he had polio. And, this was back around 1920s. And the treatment his tribe did, which cured his polio, was to dig a deep hole, line it with burning coals, and they would put some bark of a tree on top of the coals, and the person to be treated would be then placed on the burning, over the burning coals on the bark. They'd be wrapped in kangaroo furs. Then they would add some of the sand or soil back in, but they would be adding in the relevant flowers to treat the condition. And the soil would be taken right up to the person's neck. Then they would pour water down on that soil, which would seep through to the bottom and get onto the coals and creating steam, like a sauna effect. And that tribe regarded that process as such a profound healing technique that it altered the soul of the person, and the person was given a new name after the process to reflect that change in their soul. And there'd be healing, what we might refer to as psychotic episodes, or very profound physical problems such as polio. And you said, as a 7-year-old boy, this elder was cured of that. Hadn't had any problems 70 years down the track. So, as I said, Indigenous people working with the flowers, for centuries. Now, what seems to have happened, almost like coinciding, say, with more the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of that knowledge seems to have been lost. And that brings us up to the modern rediscovery of flower essences. And that was a Welsh doctor called Edward Bach. Some pronounce his name Batch. And he was a immunologist, and then he became a homeopath. And in the 1930s, he started researching the flowers. Prior to that, he was working with what is known as the bowel nosodes. He would collect samples of his patients who had chronic diseases, samples of their bowel. He would cultivate it to get bacteria, make it homeopathically, and then give them that as a remedy. But he decided nature must have a much simpler healing method, playing around with people's poo. And he was directed to find the answers out in nature. And he came up with 38 flowers at the end of his life. He died in 1936. Now, society is very different today than what it was back all those years ago. You couldn't just hop on a plane and fly from Europe to Australia. Right? You had to catch a boat. It'd take you 7 weeks. There was no computers. England back then was a very Anglo-Saxon community. There was no mixed races. We're shortly going to be doing a meditation in some of the later sessions. Now, I'm sure the majority of people we're going to be talking to have done a meditation before. Back then, they would have been totally alien. Okay? Learning problems, which are so prevalent today, not such an issue back then. Mixed marriages. Okay? The speed of life was so much slower back then. Okay? We think they still probably had those basic emotional states, but so much has changed back then. And that's why I said that, the essences coming through now are relating more to very specific situations going on in our society, in our world. Okay? But for me, Bach's legacy is not so much his 38 remedies, but bringing back this ancient healing system back to the world. And, you know, when we look at how an essence is made very shortly, on one level, it's like, oh, that's very simplistic. You know, is that all there is? Actually does something. So, you know, it was that great passion of Bach to very brilliantly bring back and show what healing flower essences can do for you. Okay. So for me, that's his great legacy. In fact, a couple of workshops, and it was going back a few decades now, we had different people come up to me in different workshops at the end of the first day saying, you know, like, I don't like to upset you anyway, but there's a man in spirit form who's, you know, behind you, and if you're gesturing this way, he's following and doing that, and not sending you up. There's a lot of reverence there for what you're doing. And I said, I just had a feeling it could be Edward Bach. So the next day I'd bring in a book with a photo of him. And, oh yeah, that's the man. So it felt really nice that his presence was still very much around there. And in that first international conference back in 1990, you could really feel his presence. So as that modern rediscoverer, just being very joyed that that work is being continued and expanding in such a great way. Okay, so that's Edward Bach, and I said the modern rediscoverer of flower essences. Now, I've talked about the doctrine of signatures. This is quite a good example to demonstrate that. Can you recognize this flower? It's the passion flower. And it got its name not because it's got aphrodisiacal qualities. It was actually named by the conquistadors, the Spanish conquistadors, as they were raping, pillaging their way through South America. And they had a thing that, you know, with indigenous people, if they wouldn't convert to Catholicism, they would kill them. Quite a good incentive to change. And they came across what they called the passion flower. And for them, it justified what they were doing because they could see the passion of Christ embodied in this flower. And they sent it off to the Pope at the time, showing this flower. Now, have a look at the flower. Is there anything that you can see which would tend to indicate the passion of Christ, which is the crucifixion of Christ? Okay. Let me point out a few things. You can see the 5 yellow stamens. Do you know how many wounds Christ had? Yes, 5. Okay. We also have, at the top here, we have the 3 green parts, which represented the Trinity. There was also the 3 nails that Christ was hung on the cross, 1 on each hand, and both his feet were impaled with 1 nail. Okay. The other 2 wounds were the crown of thorns, which you can see here as well, that lovely pink in the center. Now we'd also think in the 21st century, oh, pink, which is the love vibration, which was very much Christ's message as well. And we have the white, which represents the purity. And we could also think of, today we talk about the white light of Christ's consciousness. And there was something quite stunning. On the seed, there were 30 black dots. How does 30 as a number tie in with the passion of Christ? Do you remember who betrayed Jesus? Okay. And you know what he was paid? He was paid 30 pieces of silver. And on the seed, you got 30 black dots. So it's quite impressive. The only downside is there were 10 sepals. And that was a bit of a tricky point for them to reconcile 10. And then, you can probably imagine, back in the Vatican at the time, they're all sitting around, how do we reconcile 10? And they probably had a little bit of communion wine, going around, and then someone said, well, we've got 12 disciples, 10's close to 12. And someone said, well, you get rid of Judas, he betrayed, he's no good. Well, that's 11. And then someone said, well, hold on. Peter, he denied, let's get rid of him. 12 minus 2, 10, perfect, we've got the passion flower. So there's a little bit of creative license in the way they came to make the passion flower. But it's an example of the doctrine of signatures, how the flower can too very deeply communicate and talk to you. And as I said, we'll be looking very closely at the doctrine of signatures of all the Bush essences. And we look at our various products. We've got what we call the insight cards, which is a photograph of each of the 69 Bush essences. And you're able to really see the doctrine of signatures in those as well. Now, I mentioned that they're safe and there's no side effects. This is taken from an orphanage in Brazil. And we've been donating the essences to orphanages in many countries for many, many years. And I said, one of the beauties is that they're safe, there's no side effects. They work to what point the person's able to deal with. Now, as I mentioned, when I graduated from naturopathy, I was predominantly a homeopath. And there's aggravations you can get from homeopathy. You need to have studied it quite well before you're prescribing. And there's one important law in homeopathy: you stop on improvement. And there was a very classic case that at college, probably the best homeopath in our year, he was taking a remedy called Thuya. And it was a 200 potency. And it was only prescribed to take it for 1 dose a day for 3 days. After the second day, he got quite noticeable improvement, and he should have stopped at that point. But he didn't. He said, only 1 dose to go. Took that third and final dose, and he aggravated. And it took 6 months for those aggravations to stop. The best homeopaths in Sydney were trying to antidote and clear it, and it took that long to run through. So the beauty of working with the Bush essences, you're not going to get those side effects. You get a self-adjusting mechanism come into play with the Bush essences. They'll work to what point the person's able to deal with, and they'll keep bubbling and chipping away, trying to help them go that next level. But they won't just open the floodgates and things come up that the person's not ready to deal with. And this is why it's important that the essence is made in the wild. Some people make radionic copies, and you lose that self-adjusting mechanism in that regard. But the beauty is having that self-adjusting mechanism is that you don't have to be trained in medicine, naturopathy, acupuncture, to be able to prescribe the essence for yourself, friends or family. That you can get parents who don't have any medical training, but they're able to prescribe the remedy because, my daughter's really upset she wasn't invited to the birthday party all the other girls in the class were invited to. So she's feeling that rejection. You don't need 5 years of medical study to see that rejection. Okay? Or someone didn't do very well in exams and their self-esteem is down. You can just give the 5 corners. Or maybe the pet dog has died and a child is feeling very upset, or other members of the family. So you can just give the remedy addressing that sadness and grief based on the emotions that you're seeing there. And knowing that there are no side effects. Some people have come up to me when I was doing the workshops live, and we cover so many remedies on the first day. And they think, my wife really needs this remedy. And then, coming back and, on the second day, think, oh no, that wasn't the best remedy. This would be much better for her. Now, there's no harm if you give a remedy which you think, oh, that's not the best. If they're going to need that healing quality of that essence, I'll get that benefit. And there's no harm if they get a remedy that they don't need. It just won't have any action. Okay, so one of the strong things. And they also work very quickly on animals and children. It's like they haven't developed as many emotional blocks and barriers as we tend to put in as we get older. So in this orphanage, visiting that day, and they asked me if I would give the drops to the children. And the school was quite lucky that there was a psychologist who donated her time, and she would make up an individual bottle for each child. And so at the beginning of the day, and these are children living maybe 10 other people in a house, maybe 1, 2 bedrooms. Fathers were very rarely present there if they were living with the family. They'd be either never emotionally or physically present, they might be in jail, there were a lot of drugs. So the orphanage was taking in these children coming from that environment. And they each had their own bottle. They were very proud of their bottle. So on roll call, they call the child's name, they come up the front, and like little birds, they'd open up and you put the drops in. They said very proud they had their own bottle. And so I had that lovely privilege of being able to give the children their essences. Now in some of the orphanages, they didn't have someone who was helping with a specific essence for each child. So what we did in those situations, we trained the cooks how to put the essences into the food, into the sugary cordials that the children were given. And we would work with the basic ones, things like rejection, abandonment, because their parents weren't there. Maybe the parents were dead. So there was, the remedies dealing with the bonding between their mother and their father. Okay, all those type of essences were main ones just being given across the board. And they were getting fantastic results. Probably not the most ideal way, but again, it's just showing how wonderful modality the flower essences are. They can be added to food, added to sugary cordials, and be able to get some very profound results. So here we have the psychologist there, and that's the children. You look at the children to see these vibrant beings, so it's really wonderful to help deal with some of that very early emotional pain and suffering that they were going through, where the parents couldn't or wouldn't look after them. And it's very profound. They might have, from the orphanages, end up with new parents looking after them, but that wounding because their biological parents were not present or didn't want to be present in their lives is still quite profound. And again, bush essences can address that wonderfully well. And the other thing is with animals and very young children, it's not a placebo effect. They don't know what they're getting, but you can see the results. So some people say, flower essences, that doesn't do anything, just placebo. And, it's a very good observation that it's not placebo. Also, during the online webinar that you'll be watching, I've got kinesiology demonstrations where we can show an immediate after effect and the change from taking the essence. So you get to see quite a number of those demonstrations as well. And this is Rosie, my dog, and just to show you how they work very quickly on the animals as well. Again, totally safe. And when we look at all our products, we've got books and a correspondence course of working with the animals. And if you go to the website under the videos, my previous dog, who's also a Sydney Silkie, there's a lovely fringed violet image where I'm talking about the fringed violet. Jane, my wife, is filming me, and we've got Pixie, my previous dog, there, and she's barking because she wants to be in the action. So Jane lets her off the leash and she comes up to me, sits on my lap, and I'm pointing at the fringe flower, and she goes and eats it. We just both cracked up. We've never seen her eat a flower before. Obviously she needed a bit more psychic protection. Now, I mentioned my experience of going into natural medicine, was getting very ill travelling through India. And I mentioned a Mack truck. So this is, it's actually a Mack truck. And down the bottom, you can see it saying, looks road train, but it looks like Boab train. So a Mack truck is the technique Spirit uses to try and keep you on track in your life. So, you know, I believe that when we are born, we've got a life plan and purpose. If we stray too far from that, we'll start getting, you know, gut feeling, intuition trying to bring us back to that right path. If we ignore that, then we might get a nightmare to really jolt us. And if we keep ignoring all those different little warnings or techniques to get us back on track, Spirit's final thing they keep up their sleeve is the Mack truck. And you can imagine if this thing hits you, it's going to make quite a mess. You can't ignore it. In fact, it was a very interesting moment. At one workshop, we normally have people introduce themselves, and everyone was, you know, blah blah, saying their names, and this person said, "Well, you know, I'm such and such, and last week I went to the funeral of my cousin, who was literally killed by being hit by a Mack truck." So it does make a mess of you. But, you know, those Mack trucks, it could be something on a physical level, like me getting very sick in India. It really changed the course of my life. It could be a business going bankrupt. It could be a marriage or a relationship ending. Something that really has quite a profound impact. And you might think, have you ever had a Mack truck experience in your life? When I ask that to a live audience, put your hand up if you've had one. People putting two hands up, putting their legs up. Yeah. So the good thing about a Mack truck is it makes changes in our life. We can't ignore it. It might be a bit easier if we didn't have to have the Mack truck. We can make those changes without it. And that's what the Essence is doing, helping us to get a sense of what we're here to do, and also giving us the confidence and courage to go through and fulfill that. And that's where we get great joy in our life, finding what we're here to do, having that passion for it. You know, and if you're doing what you really love, that's such an important part of life. And you'll find that financial reward tends to flow as a result of that as well. Okay? I think, you know, one of the very saddest things I found in practice was people coming in and saying, I know there's something I'm supposed to be doing, I just don't know what it is. And we have essences for that too. Now, I'm going to show you how the essences are made. And I said it's on one level, it's quite simple, but there's some very crucial things. And I think I can't stress enough, it's not just an interaction between the plant and, say, myself when I'm making it, but it's between the plant kingdom, the spiritual kingdom, and myself, all three kingdoms. And this is a shot taken at a level 3 workshop in Austria. In level 3 workshop, as a group, we all make an essence together. And the Untners, Ingrid and Herbert, were my distributors there at the time, also my workshop organisers. Both of them were taking photos. And Herbert had a digital camera, and Ingrid, his wife, had an old SLR with film in it. And when it got developed, they had some interesting patches there. There were no clouds that day. And I'm meditating, getting that communication from the plants, wild parsley, that we were making that day. And so it's a real embodiment of that spiritual energy. It's a very powerful time when making an energy. You can feel that intensity at that time. I can go back to that location a later date and it feels nice to be there, but it's not the same because you're bringing in all that spiritual realm. And I'm communicating, interacting with the devas, nature spirits, for example, in making that essence. Now, I'm the one who goes and makes the essence. We have over 20 staff working here at Bush Essences. But it's very important, whoever's making it is in a very balanced state. And not that I'm in a balanced state every day. If I've just had an argument with my next door neighbour and I'm driving off to make an essence, or I've been pulled over by the police for speeding, then I'm not going to make the essence that day. And I make the essence because I know I'm going to, follow that and I can really trust that it'll only be made in the right environmental conditions. Also, I'm in the right balanced state to be making it. I don't grow the plants to make them. I find them growing out in the wild. There are 69 bush essences, and we'll be covering about a third of those in this level 1. The level 2, level 3 will respectively do the second and then the third of the remedies. And they come from all parts of Australia. In the desert, they go in the tropical area. We have an alpine area, temperate climates, so rainforest. So, I'm going to all parts of Australia in preparing the essence. I don't grow them to be made. And you can see here I'm working with pink mulla mulla. Down near my knee is a bowl. So when Bach was doing his work, originally he used to collect the dew of the flowers as well. But he was a very impatient type character. He was a bit of a black-eyed Susan. So he started simulating that process. And he did that by collecting flowers and placing the bowl. And the sun would release that vibration into the water. Now Bach also did half his remedies that way. The other half were done by what's known as the boiling method, especially with the buds. But in Australia, we've got a lot more sun than what you'd find there in England, especially back there in the 1930s before global warming. And in fact, I went to one of the areas where Bach lived for 2 years. And I was there in June, the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And there was no sun that whole week. He was needing 4 hours of sunlight to prepare his essences. I'm not quite sure how he got to do it, actually. So recently I made up one of the remedies. The very last one we'll look in the level 1, which is Boab. And I make it up in the northwest of Australia, in the Kimberley region. And it was 47 degrees Celsius the morning that I made that remedy up. So it doesn't need 4 hours in the bowl. It needs anywhere from about an hour and a half to 2 hours normally. But that's an example why I don't need boiling method, because we've got so much more intensity of the sun. And I only make the remedies in this sunshine method, which I'll go on and explain more here. Okay. So if you notice down the bottom of the bowl, there are flowers. I'm picking the flowers, but I'm not touching them with my hands. I'm using pure water to put the flowers in. In this slide, you can see that I'm got something else. I'm holding the pink mulla mulla flower, and it's from that same plant. It's the stem of another pink mulla mulla plant. I wouldn't use a eucalyptus leaf to pick a pink mulla mulla, for example. And I'm carrying it over to the bowl because I don't want to touch it with my fingers. It's going to pick up my energy and vibration. I'm trying to keep myself out of the picture as much as possible, and then just placing it in the bowl. Now, I'll leave the flowers in that direct sunlight for, I said, 1.5 to maybe 3/4 of an hour. And as you watch, the flower goes limp. At that point, the energy has been released into the water. And that's what I'm after. At that point, I'm discarding the flowers. Again, not using my hands, using a part of the same plant. Discarding the flowers. And what I'm going to do with that water which is remaining is that, we'll go back, I'm pouring it into a bottle which is half filled of brandy. Why do you think I'm pouring it into a bottle half filled of brandy? Yeah, brandy is acting as a preservative agent. Interesting enough, I collect the flowers that I've been used, and there's some alchemic principle that occurs with those flowers that they will last much longer than if I was to pick similar flowers from that species and just collect them and put them together. The ones that have been in the mother tincture process last longer. And it's in picking the flowers, the other important thing is to really have reverence and respect. If I had a bowl of flowers and I picked one, throw it into a bowl of water, nothing would happen. If I want to extract that healing energy of the flower, it's really me being in a very reverent place in that whole process. So I will sit when I get to the location. I mean, sometimes I've been driving for a few hours, walking. I sit, do a meditation just to ground myself. Then I will be meditating, tuning in. I'll draw the flower as well, so I can help observe the doctrine of signatures of that plant, which can help me understand more aspects of the flower. At that point, I will ask permission to pick flowers from the bush. And I wait till I get a very strong response, yes. In fact, what I often say is, which flowers want to be used to help heal humankind today? And some will shake and vibrate. I suppose not all the flowers on the bush or the tree, whatever. And to me, that's very much saying, pick me, pick me. They're the ones that want to be used. Now, I can tune in and feel the energy of flowers. And the ones which are shaking, vibrating have a higher energy. It's almost like the plant is picking the ones with the most potent life force and energy to be used to make the remedy. A couple of times I've got a strong sense, no, you can't work with flowers from this bush. And I don't know why. Maybe, down the roots there's a disease. Maybe it's crossing a ley line. But, I've followed that and gone to a similar bush nearby, and I've been fine to pick those flowers. And so this water, when the flowers have released the energy, I'm pouring it back into the bowl of the brandy. That it becomes our mother tincture. Now we're going to take a short break for 7 minutes. And when we come back, I'll show you how we go from the mother tincture down to the next dilution. So we get the point where it's the dosage bottle, the one that someone would take. And I'll tell you how to take it. And we'll also look at how to make up creams and oils using the essences as well. So 7 minutes, and then we'll start back. Welcome back from the break. Just before we went to the break, I was going through how the mother tinctures are prepared. So if we look at that last slide, you can see me that I'm pouring the water the flowers have been floating in into a bottle half filled of brandy. Now, if we do an animation of that bottle of brandy, the mother tincture said it's half brandy, half flower water. Okay. Now that can be any size bottle. That's the first concentrate. From there, we're going to prepare what's known as the stock bottle. And the stock bottle is which you will get, and it's the second concentrate. So if you're going to be making up lots of remedies for people, yourself, friends, family, patients, if you're a practitioner, you'd be working from the stock bottle. Now, to prepare the stock bottle, we put 7 drops of the mother tincture into the stock bottle. Now, the stock bottle has 2/3 brandy and 1/3 water, which, you can see here that the level is a little bit higher, that line going across. And the water this time is good purified water. Not tap water, and it doesn't relate to the water the flower's been floating in. So you might go and get some Puro here in Australia is a good brand, a lot of reverse osmosis. So your bottle would have the 2/3 brandy, 1/3 purified water, and then you're going to add 7 drops of stock. And you can see here on the bottle that there are those 7 circles representing the drops. Now that's the stock bottle. So, as I said, you don't usually take from the stock bottle. You prepare another remedy from that, and that's called the dose bottle. For example, I've been taking Cognos Essence just before coming on and teaching. This is ready to go. This is in the dosage strength. Now, for making up a dose bottle, you can use, say, anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 brandy, and then the rest is the water. Now, any size bottle between 1 to 30 milliliter in your dose bottle, you're going to put the 7 drops of stock. Okay? So, for example, our combination remedies are 30 ml bottles. So, we're putting in the 7 drops of stock into that dose bottle. So, if you go back and remember, I was showing making up the pink mulla mulla. So if I wanted to make up a bottle of pink mulla mulla for someone, I would put 7 drops of stock into my bottle, which is up to 30 ml of the dose bottle, which has got your brandy water, and then I'd put 7 drops of stock of pink mulla mulla, and that would be then the dose bottle of pink mulla mulla. Now, if I had a larger size bottle, anyone from 31 to 60 ml, I would put in 14 drops of stock. If I was having a bottle which is between 60 to 90 or 61 to 90 mils, I would put 21 drops. So for every 30 ml, we're adding in 7 drops. If I had just a 15 ml dose bottle, again, I'd be putting in 7 drops of stock. So it's from 1 to 30 ml size bottle, 7 drops. Now, I just mentioned our Cognos Essence, which is a great one for learning, concentration, focus, etc. In fact, this could be a nice remedy that we suggest at the end of the session. You might want to take 7 drops so you'll assimilate and integrate any new information. It helps break down large chunks of information into small, usable bits that you can retain. Okay. Now, the Cognos bottle has got 5 different remedies in it. So when we're preparing a Cognis dose bottle, we're putting 7 drops of each of those 5 remedies in there. So in total, there's 35 drops of stock in the Cognis dose bottle. Now, you can, up to you how many remedies you want to put into your dose bottle. I would suggest that you address in your dose bottle one key theme at a time. So you might have someone come to see you and they say, oh, look, I'm really jealous. My neighbours have got a new car and I'm really jealous. I can't stop thinking about them. I'm very jealous. I've also got an ingrown toenail. And, my dog got run over a year ago and I've never really got over it. I'm still feeling really sad about that. Now, there are 3 separate, distinct issues that person is dealing with. So rather than making a dose bottle for them, trying to address the grief, the jealousy, and the physical problem of the toenail, it's best to just focus on the most important of those 3. And you would ask the person, okay, of those 3 things, which is the thing you'd like to resolve the most? And it could be the jealousy. So the first bottle you would give that person is addressing the jealousy. Now, if you give all 3 remedies in the one bottle, the jealousy, grief, and toenail, you end up with like a shotgun approach, and it's not nearly as effective. Whereas if you focus on the key thing, resolve that, sometimes you find the lesser ones tend to fall away. Okay. And I also think it's very important to ask the person, if they're coming to you for some help and guidance, what is it that they want resolved? You might be very intuitive and you're picking up, some unresolved father issues here, and there's something, problems with their liver. But they've come in because of a different aspect. And if you don't address that, no matter how brilliant your treatment is and what great results you get, they'll be a little bit disappointed. So I always make it a point with patients that I'm working with, asking them, what have you come here? What do you want to get resolved? And if there's a number of different issues that they're talking about, then I get them, okay, what's the priority? What would be the thing that you'd want to resolve the most? And I address that one first. It's very rare that I would put more than 5 remedies in the dose bottle, 5 different essences in the dose bottle. So if you're only addressing one key theme, then you rarely would need more than that. Now you may be thinking, hold on, what about your travel essence? It's got 14 different remedies. And that's a very unusual situation, is that we're not really designed. We haven't evolved the point where we can safely spend many hours in a plane without any side effects. So, and when we were developing the travel essence, one of the Bush Essence teachers was also a pilot. And she'd been employed by one of the commercial airlines in Australia to investigate what were the major stress factors for both cabin crew and also the pilots. And as a result of that, we identified many different aspects, and we put essences in to address all of them. There's a different stress if you're flying north-south than east-west. And of course, if you're going east-west, you can have issues with time zones and body clock. There's pressurized cabins, which means you don't digest very well. You can also get, because of the pressurized cabins, lymph coming out, which is why people can get swollen ankles. They start the flight okay, take their shoes off, they arrive, especially on a long haul flight, and they can't get the shoes back on. There's also, that's also partly caused by dehydration, which can occur. And if you're flying regularly, especially if you're a female, your whole hormonal menstrual cycle can get thrown out of whack. Okay? The worst place to be sitting on a plane is in line with the engines, that engine vibrations. Stewards will have more accidents in line with the engines than any other places, spilling things, dropping things, etc. So, when you're checking in, A, make sure you got a bottle of your travel essence, because we're addressing all these factors, but then ask where are you seated, and if you happen to be in line with the engines, you might want to ask for a different seat further away, either in front or behind it. So that's an unusual situation. And, that's requiring 98 drops of stock, which is really taking quite a bit of a dent of all of our stock and mother tinctures to preparing the travel essence, as opposed to, say, Cognis, which has only got the 5. Now, I did experiment way back. I've been working with the bush essences for many, many years, and like 35 years. And so I've experimented at different times, because 7 was that intuitive information that kept coming through of how many drops to put in there. And also the dose is 7 drops. And, different times I experiment around, put 4 and 2, etc. But the results were always better with 7. So that's what we've stuck with. Can you think of any symbolism that relates back to 7? What's the significance of 7? And probably of all the numbers, I think it's the richest in symbolism than any other one. In fact, one of our newsletters, and back when it was on a 4 newsletters a year, a whole newsletter was devoted to the significance of the 7 and different aspects. So we've got 7 days a week, 7 musical notes, the 7 virtues. One of our subtle bodies is developed every 7 years. So we've got our physical body, then we've got all these subtle bodies. And we're going to be looking at that probably in the next session. So we've got the physical, we've got an emotional. Can you think of any of the others? Mental, etheric, causal, okay, and we've also got the astral body, and there's 2 causals, an inner and outer causal body. So there's 6 subtle bodies, and the 7th, which is the physical body. Okay, so, and every 7 years, one of those bodies is more fully developed, which is why we traditionally celebrate a 21st birthday, because if you made it 21, 3 of your subtle bodies, and physical and 2 of the subtles, would be physically formed. So there's a very good chance you would survive illnesses and stresses, for example. Today, people have forgotten the reason, it's just an excuse to have a party. All the cells in the body totally change in a sequence of 7. The length of a leaf in relation to the height of a tree is in a ratio of 7. Now, in numerology, which is something that I work with all my patients, every patient I've ever treated, and I've been in practice for over 40 years, I've always done the numerology chart for them. Because in 15 seconds from getting their birth date, I can draw their chart up straight away. I can see their strengths and challenges. And each of the numbers represents different qualities. 7 is the highest number on the physical plane. It's all about learning of lessons. I know some of you have done my numerology online course, for example. We go into a lot of information about that. In the year 7, it's the Mack truck. We've already had a little photo of the Mack truck. And, like if you're not learning a lesson, it's going to come up thick and fast during a personal year 7. Okay. In some cultures, 7 represents the number of God. It's a very rich, once I got that information, why 7? But then doing a little bit of research, you can understand why 7 seems to be quite significant. Now that's my recommendation, that when you're prescribing the remedy to someone, that you would suggest that they take the drops, 7 drops in the morning, 7 drops at night. However, if you strongly feel that you should be giving them 12.5 drops, then follow your intuition. Same as if making up from your stock bottle, you really feel, no, when I use the Bach flowers, I put in 4 drops, I'm going to use 4 drops. And on that, I do get asked from time to time, can you put in the Bach flowers or flower essence from a different system into a bottle with the bush essences? Now, apart from the fact why would you? In terms of the English, there's an equivalent of every one of the 38. But if you really felt drawn that you wanted to use it, by all means you can. Now, for the bark remedies, it's 4 drops from the stock. But the dose is 4 times a day. Now, the beauty of the bush essence is you're taking it just 7 drops in the morning, 7 drops at night. First thing in the morning when you wake up, you're setting the energy for the day, you're taking the remedy. Where at last thing at night, your brain waves are starting to shift, going down to alpha and theta. Right? You're slowing down. Very powerful time in the psyche to be taking your essence. And also, you just need to leave the bottle by your bedside table. And it's not like, if you're going to take it in the remedy 4 times a day, you've got to be taking it with you. You've got to think, oh, it's finished lunch, I've got to take it. And oh, I missed the dinner. So easy to forget. And by taking it on that regular morning and night, you develop a very good rhythmic pattern and sequence to it. But, if you feel you want to do it differently, then by all means. And in fact, if you are mixing different ranges, and say we've used the example of the bark flowers, they suggest you take it 4 times a day, then I would recommend that to get the optimal benefit of that other range, you would take the drops 4 times a day. And I would still suggest you take 7 drops. Just when you're putting the stock in there, you're putting in the 4 drops. Okay. How long should you be taking a remedy for? Well, if it's more of a physical problem, then I would suggest that you're taking it for a longer period, that I would suggest doing the bush essence for a month, then reassessing to see if you need, there's been some improvement but hasn't totally resolved, then you can continue taking it, repeating it. I was taught in naturopathic philosophy that for every year a person has got the physical problem, they should be taking the remedy for a month. And that's based on more on vitamins or herbs or what have you. You'll find that the bush essence work a lot quicker than that. But as a rough guideline, physical problems, then you would take it, say, for a month and then reassess. And quite likely you might get results before that. Okay? And as an example, probably the most profound physical healing that I've experienced as a practitioner was one of my patients. She was crippled with arthritis. She couldn't even sit down and she was in so much pain. Deformity in her hands. Now, when we started doing the consultation and getting a bit more information, it seemed that everything was related back 4 years earlier when her husband left her for another woman. And it was quite a shock to her, and a lot of intense sadness that she experienced with that. So as a result of that, I gave her the remedy, the Sturt Desert Pea. Very profound, deep acting remedy, one we cover in Level 2 workshop. She rang me 4 days later, crying, tears flowing everywhere. And she said, ever since I've started this remedy, I haven't stopped crying. And I'm thinking, well, that's a really good thing. It's better out than in. And then she said, but all the deformity has gone. The hands, all those nasty big bulges had gone. Now, if you were to tell a rheumatologist that, they'd laugh and say it's totally impossible to get such a physical shift in such a short period of time. Yet when you treat the cause of the problem, it's amazing how quickly the symptoms can withdraw. Now, I mentioned Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicines, for thousands of years, observing people, their symptoms, and realizing the connection between the emotions and the physical symptoms. That they conservatively say 90% of all our physical symptoms stem from those emotional and spiritual imbalances. So this was an example of treating the cause rather than just the symptoms. You get great healing. And if you only address the symptoms, well, that's a Band-Aid approach. That's really what Western medicine's about. Why it has so many limitations. Okay? Now, if you were using or treating someone with an emotional problem, we would suggest that give the remedy for 2 weeks, then reassess. And of course, the beauty of the bush essence is they're totally safe. There's no side effects. And it might be after 2 weeks, you think, well, yeah, that's really resolved. We'll move on to the next one. Or like, well, there's been some shifts, but I need to give the remedy a little bit longer to keep working. And I said, there's no harm with the bush essences. I've been working with flower essences for like 45 years. And in that time, I think I've had 5 cases of what we call an aggravation, where the person felt really bad from taking that remedy. Okay? So, and you know, the easy solution to that is you stop the remedy. You can give some emergency essences for a couple of days, settle things down, and then start back with the remedy. Say, I think it's happened 3 times with bark flowers and twice with bush essences. So then I reintroduce the same remedy, but just at night, and I put the 7 drops in a little bit of water, and everything's going fine. They continue on that way for a few days, and then you can introduce the second dose, the one in the morning. But as I said, there's totally safe to be working with it. Now, there's also what's termed a healing crisis. This is when symptoms can get a little bit more intense, but the person's feeling okay about it. Now, later on in this level 1, I'm going to be talking about the flower Old Man Banksia. It works brilliantly on the thyroid. Now, a very small percentage of people have experienced a tightness around their throat when taking that remedy. It only lasted for a couple of days, and it was a very small percentage of people who did it. But they thought, oh no, it feels good. And, you know, that woman I just mentioned who was crying, I mean, she was taking the remedy for sadness, and there was the intensity of the tears, but it felt good. And that's what we call a healing crisis. And again, very smallest percentage of people will go through and experience that. But, yeah, just to let you know some of these different things that can occur when you're doing it. Now, I would suggest that if you're making a remedy, even for yourself, but especially if it's for another person, and if you're a practitioner, you definitely want to be doing this, that you just write down the date, what essences you gave, and what were some of the main things you're wanting to treat. Because it's often happened that people have said, oh, my patient came back to me and they said, oh, I don't know why I've come, nothing's happened, nothing changed. I've had a few patients over the years who've done that too. And then you look at the notes and say, oh, you're getting headaches every second night. And they go, oh, gee, no, I haven't had those for a while. And you're getting pain in your stomach after eating meals. Oh, no, that's gone now. It's really a very positive thing, actually, because we don't want to remember all our old symptoms. And once the symptoms go, people forget about them. But then they don't associate that it's the essence that they've been taking, which is why those symptoms have gone. So you've got a good notes to just let you know what's happening. And the bush essence, they work very deeply, quickly, and profoundly. They've got a reputation worldwide for being incredibly quick acting and deep acting. Okay. Now, the other thing that I would suggest is that you work with just 1 bottle of essences at a time. Let's say someone's taking the relationship essence. You know, there's a bit of a challenge in their relationship, but they've got exams coming. That they wouldn't take the Cognos combination for the 2 weeks while they're also working with the relationship essence. Now, there are a couple of remedies, and Cognos is one, and emergency, which can be used as a one-off remedy quite well. Normally we said, okay, it's a physical problem, take it for a month, emotional problem for 2 weeks. But let's say the person's on the relationship essence, they're riding home on their bike, they fall over and they're feeling a bit shaken up. They could take a dose or 2 of emergency essence just to settle them, even though they have been taking the Cognos. Or they might be doing the relationship essence, they're at work, and there's a deadline, and there's a few staff away sick, and they've got extra work, and they're really feeling overwhelmed. Like, they could take a one-off dose of Cognos to help with the overwhelm. But they wouldn't be taking the Cognos for 2 weeks while they're on the relationship essence there for that 2-week period. Okay. Now, the other thing is we use brandy as our preservative. It's the best preservative. The dose bottles, they're going to last for 3 years. So if you prescribe it for someone, you really hope that they will take the remedy within that 3 years. The stock bottle have a higher concentration. You know, like, remember the slide that we've done, this middle one, which is a stock bottle, has half brandy, sorry, 2/3 brandy in it. Whereas our dose bottle has about 1/3. So that extra brandy is going to give your shelf life longer. You only get 5 years shelf life from your stock bottle and 3 years from your dose bottle. Okay. Now, because it is brandy, some people don't like to use brandy. It could be religious, could be a health aspect. I've had a lot of alcoholic patients who've been quite happy to have their dose bottle. And, you know, again, look at our thing. There's 7 drops of stock in there. Now, the stock is, you know, 2/3. So they're getting a very small amount of actual brandy. And they've been quite happy to put in a glass of water and dilute it even further. Some of the Muslim clerics have suggested that, you know, if a Muslim person is taking the remedies, to get rid of the alcohol, you put the drops into hot water, the temperature that you'd have a cup of tea. Alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water. So if it's just a nice hot cup of tea, that's enough to evaporate the alcohol. Alternatively, you can also put the remedies on topically. So the best places to put it on topically are on the wrists, temple, and on the crown. Okay. So, and if a person is unconscious, you don't want to be putting drops in their mouth because it can go down the esophagus, go in their lungs, and they can get pneumonia. But, you know, like, again, if you came across someone who's been involved in an accident, they're unconscious, putting some emergency temples, wrists, that would be perfectly quite okay in that regard. Now, the other good thing, the essences are quite hardy. They don't get antidoted very easily. We'll be looking at some of our therapeutic creams, the space mists, and they've got essential oils in there. And the bush essences will cope quite well. Homeopathics, which is also another form of vibrational medicine like the flower essences, they get antidoted by, you know, strong smells. And, you know, the bush essences are pretty hardy. So in terms of storing them, you know, it's not too much of an issue. We probably would suggest storing them away from, say, a microwave oven where there's a lot of electromagnetic radiation coming off it. Okay. One woman went away for holiday. She lived in Queensland, and she left her stock kit in the boot of her car. And she was away for about 6 weeks. You know, you can imagine the temperatures which, you know, everything would have got to inside her boot. When she came back, she just felt, you know, like, it just feels like that prolonged heat has affected the remedies, and she bought herself a new kit. Okay. So, you know, they're pretty hardy, as I said, and they will store quite well. Okay. Now, if we go back to our slide of how we make the remedies up, okay, you can see down here we're saying if you've got a dose bottle from 1 to 30 ml, you're going to put 7 drops of stock. What say you're a massage therapist and you want to put the remedies into your massage cream? And there's a couple of remedies which are fantastic. Flannel flower. If you've never had someone having body work before and they're a bit apprehensive about being touched, flannel flower makes them more comfortable. Or you've got someone who's got a lot of aches and pains, tight muscles. Crowia is fantastic for tight muscles. We went into a cramp there, talking of tight muscles. So how do you put the essences into your massage oil? Oil is a bit thicker than your brandy water solution. So it's actually 7 drops for between 1 and 15 ml of oil. If you had a 30 ml amount of oil, you would put in 14 drops. So it's really a halving what we've got here. Or should we say it's doubling them up? No. Now it's the same if you want to make a cream. Again, creams are heavy, more dense and medium. So it's 7 drops of stock for every 15 grams of cream. And between 16 to 30 grams of cream, you're going to be putting in 14 drops of your stock. And then, of course, you're going to be stirring it all up, putting it in there. Okay. Now, if we go and have a look at the next slide, it's a very historical slide. And this was the first essence that I made up, and it's pawpaw. And you can see in those days, the bowls were a lot smaller. These days, I use much larger bowls than what is shown here in this slide. But as I said, this was an unprepared essence-making adventure, this shot. I was doing a kinesiology conference, and everyone was overwhelmed. We weren't expecting to get a lot of material being presented to us. It was supposed to be more like a bit of a junket holiday. And everyone in overwhelm. And I was drawn to the pawpaw, and it was up in the tropics. So during a break, I went and started preparing the essence. And I left, I could find this little bowl, very happy, and picked the pawpaw flowers. Very hot day. And I was a bit worried about leaving this bowl with cold water and nice juicy flowers in there because there were being cows around. So, I set some energy around the bowl, went in, came back, and I noticed within about 2 meters of the bowl there was cow dung, but they hadn't actually come and eaten the flowers, which I'm sure would have been very tempting. And that was, the very first essence making where that magic of the essence making was very prevalent. Okay. And I talked in the shot in Austria where I'm meditating that spiritual presence. And there certainly is that magic, and also the role of the nature spirits, the devas. And in the level 2 workshop, I go into that theme in a lot more detail. Now, in your portal, there's a lot of all the handouts you can access. So this is a bit of a recap of how the essences are made. In your own time, you can go to the portal, read up about it. Okay. Now, this image, we have the physical body and the 6 subtle bodies surrounding us. And this is a good way to explain why you take the remedies longer if you're working with a physical problem. If, for example, you're feeling jealous, your neighbour 2 days ago got a new car and you're feeling really jealous. If a psychic was to look in your aura, there'd be a bit of a murky green. And it's in the subtle bodies. But if that jealousy stays in too long, it gradually will start to filter through and affect you on a physical level. And jealousy, along with rage and hatred, are emotions which have an impact on the gallbladder. And for the Australian people watching this, you may recall that a few years ago, there was a Prime Minister of the country who was removed while he was in power by his own party. A few days after his coup d'etat, he was sitting in the back benches by himself, and you could just feel this rage and fury. It's almost like steam coming out of him. And a couple of days after this photo was taken, he had emergency surgery to remove his gallbladder. Now, he certainly had a reputation for having, a bad temper and getting quite angry quite a lot of times. And they're the emotions which can really have an impact on your gallbladder. Now, if you're feeling a little bit of jealousy, it's probably not going to stay in your aura long enough that it'll have the time to filter through and give you a problem with your gallbladder straight away. But if you've been having any of those emotions, the rage, jealousy, anger, for a long time, then they stay from just being in the subtle bodies, start to infiltrate and come back into the physical body. Which is why I said, if you're just going to treat the physical symptoms, you're not getting to the cause of why that person had the problem. And that's the beauty of the Bush Essence. They're getting help with the physical, but they're getting to the cause, that emotional, spiritual causes as well. Now, when we have the stock kit, there's 69 remedies. It was too much to put into one box, so you actually get 2 boxes. And you've also got the reference book in there. And the reference book has got all 69 remedies. It's got the combinations in there. So you get that comes with the kit. And from one stock bottle, these 15ml bottles you can see there, you're going to get close to 40 dose bottles you can prepare from it. So this is the concentrate. So if you were going to be using a lot for your friends and family or a practitioner, you'd be probably getting the stock kit because you're going to make a lot of remedies from it. Now, in the pharmacies, health food stores, we have a range of remedies. We call them remedy essences. They're combinations. They've got more than one essence in them, and they're in the dosage strength. Again, so 7 drops on rising and retiring. These are the ones which have already got the brandy added to them, which is I gave you the options of if you don't want the brandy, or maybe even working with a young child, for example. Now, I've made comparisons already between different forms within the vibrational umbrella. We've got flower essences, we've got homeopathics. In homeopathics, you dilute the remedies more frequently. You keep diluting them down, and they get stronger as you dilute them. And that's a big difference with flower essences. So we have the mother tincture, we've got the stock, and then you have the final dilution, which is called the dose strength. All our combinations are at the dose strength. So it doesn't work to think, oh, I've got a bottle of Abund essence, you know, I'm going to dilute it down and make it even stronger or get more Abund essence bottles from it. It works very poorly if you dilute the dose bottle, so I wouldn't suggest doing that. We also have oral sprays. Some people found them more convenient than keeping the bottles in a bag or in a purse. Now, we have just on 20 combination remedies, but there's only 6 of the oral sprays. But they're sleek, they're easy to administer. Rather than counting out the 7 drops, you just give 2 squirts in the mouth. I must admit, I'm a little bit sentimental towards using the drops. Earlier I showed you this shot in the orphanage in Brazil, and there's something quite nice about putting drops in someone's mouth rather than just squirting something in, but that's just my preferences. In fact, carrying on from what I mentioned about Ayurvedic traditional Chinese and the correlation between our physical symptoms and emotional causes, when we started doing the work with the orphanages in South America, especially Brazil, but also in Argentina and Chile, we were donating our kits to the orphanages, and at the very beginning, on average, the children were getting about 6 cases of bronchitis each per year. Now, lungs in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, corresponds to grief and sadness. So certainly when you've got children who don't have any parents, they're either not able to look after them, they're in jail, or they're dead, then there's going to be a lot of sadness. And when after a year of having the essence being used in the orphanages, I mean, sometimes there'd be the bottles like this where there's a specific bottle for each child, and if there was no practitioner to make up a remedy individually, then we train the cooks how to put the essences into their food and their cordials, etc. So after 1 year, the incidence of bronchitis had dropped from 6 cases per child per year to less than 1 case per child per year. But of course, not only that, the sadness was down, the children were far more happier. You know, we put remedies dealing with the bond between the mother, a bond between the child and the father, the abandonment. And we'll be looking at those remedies during this level 1 course, so we'll go into a lot more detail about it. Now, what we've looked at has been the drops going directly into the mouth, or the sprays. We've also got our space mists. And there, you can use them as a toner, but it's more preferable, I think, to using it in environments. So you could be, traveling on a plane, you can spray the travel mist all around you. You'll feel a lot more refreshed from doing that. If I go traveling, as soon as I get to the hotel or the Airbnb or wherever I'm staying, the very first thing I do is get the space clearing and I spray all around the area where I'm going to be staying. Because if you're in a hotel or Airbnb, you've got no idea who was in there before you. Could have been a couple who were arguing the whole time. Someone might have died of a heart attack a few days before you got into your room. So you really want to clear and shift that energy. We have a lot of school teachers who get a little bit frustrated because they, sometimes too much red tape be able to give children drops under the tongue. But they can spray the remedies, either calm and clear if they're really disruly, or there's, say, exams going to be happening that morning, and they spray the classroom with emergency essence before the children come in, or the teenagers come in. Really calms and settles, helps get rid of the anxiety, for example. And they've got essential oils in there. They smell very nice as well. The therapeutic creams. I mean, that's very much therapeutic. I mean, you can use them as a moisturizer in their own right. It's all certified organic creams and very beautiful cream. But they've got the essences in there. So calm and clear, for example. You've got someone who has trouble going off to sleep. Put it on their face, also around their feet. Helps bring the blood from the head down to the feet. And you'll find it'll help them go off to sleep. Great one, whether it's an adult or even a very young child. And stress headaches. A little bit of calm and clear, just lightly massaging the forehead. Just some brilliant results, getting rid of them very quickly. Emergency essence for aches and pains. Rub it on. It's also a great one if someone's starting to knows a pimple is coming up. Put emergency cream on straight away. It's great results in that regard. And just to give you an example, there was one of my patients, and she woke up very early one morning, and she was in agonizing pain. She said, "Ian, I've had 2 children. This was worse than any labor I experienced." Her husband was an interstate truck driver, and he had to go almost around that time that she woke up. And, he was very apologetic, and, at short notice, he couldn't take the truck. So he said, "Well, can I get you a cup of tea, a hot water bottle?" It was about the limit of what he was able to do. And she noticed there was some woman cream that she'd been using just as putting on face. So she rubbed in around the belly, the low back where that pain was. It took all the sharpness out, and she was able to drift off back to sleep. When she woke up, she was in a lot better shape, still in pain, used the cream again, went back to sleep. Now, when she woke up at a normal time in the morning, it was just 90% gone. And she wrote to me and just said, "Thank heavens for the creams and the essences." And, so they're working at a very profound way. Now, the beauty of using creams is that you don't have to use just one remedy at a time. You might be taking the relationship essence, but you can be using calm and clear at night, and you might want to use, say, the travel as your moisturizer during the day. You can use different cream to what drops you're taking under the tongue. And you can use more than one cream in the day as well. Kylie Minogue, apparently, when she was doing her concert, she had in a contract that she had to get a massage at the end of a show. And like most people performing at night, whether they're sports people or performers, they get a lot of adrenaline. So she always used to ask for calm and clear to be massaged with that to help slow her down, so stop all that adrenaline rush. She'll be able to go off to sleep at a decent hour after a concert. Now, we've also got, as well as the bush essences, there are 3 ranges of spiritual remedies. And if you go to your portal, you'll be able to see the information on those. So we have the white light essences, light frequency, and the main difference between these two and the bush essences is these were made from all around the world, where the bush essences are made just in Australia with Australian flowers. And we're not working with flowers. Okay. And the other difference is, and this along with the third, the divine presence essences, which is 4 of those, is you don't mix any of the spiritual remedies. You only take them as a single remedy. For example, here you might take Solar Logos by itself, but you wouldn't mix it with a bush essence or want something from the white light essence range. Also, when you're making them, It's 7 drops, not in 30 mils like the Bush essences, but 7 drops in a 15 ml bottle. So there are some differences. And you wouldn't be taking, say, a bottle of Isis at the same time that you were taking a Bush essence remedy. Work out which one you're going to work with and stick with that. When you finish that, then you can go on to the others. And for example, if we go back, light frequency, I went off to Greenland to make the Arctic essence. So, traveling all around the world, Antarctic in the light frequency as well. So, just really drawn to different places where I told in meditation I had to go to prepare these essences. Now, we've seen the little reference book has all 69. This was my first book, and it has the first 50 remedies in it. There's some chapters on other things, but there's also a physical repertory. So if you look under gallbladder, you'll find the essences which help with problems with the gallbladder. Okay. And there's colour photos of the 50 in there. My second book also has the colour photos, covers the next 12 remedies, and there's other chapters in there as well. And it has the physical repertory, but also an emotional repertory. So if you're looking under jealousy, you would see the remedies for that. Or, might be looking under eating disorders. Okay. So they're quite separate, the two books. And it's available in many different languages. Happy Healthy Kids has all the 69 in there. Colour photos of them all as well. And it's really designed for common conditions. You can use the remedies for children from going from the conception right up to age 7, both emotional, physical problems. And there's a lot of case histories we've added in there as well. I had one woman at a workshop when I mentioned was from up to age 7 to, oh, dang, my daughter's 8. A sore throat between a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old is probably going to be the same, or they're getting bullied at school. It's going to be the same essences that you'd be thinking of. The reference book, which I mentioned, has all the remedies. A quick little summary comes with the stock kit. Animal healing. The remedies, I've said, work wonderfully well on children as well as animals. And there's no placebos. It's not like, oh, I'm telling my dog it's going to get the one for aggression. I'm sure that's why it's getting improved. They've got no understanding. Same as a young baby's getting a remedy. It's not placebo when you see the changes. And I got Mari Matthews to write this book. She had access to all our case histories as well. Mari was our first correspondence course tutor. Okay. She was also editor of the newsletter for a very long time. And it was Mari who really got me to complete the Bushflower Healing book. I'd been talking about a lot at workshops, and I still hadn't written it. Mari saying, when are you going to write the book? And I said, oh yeah, I'm getting around to it. And I'd be off traveling somewhere, making essences, didn't create the time. So she said, Ian, I'm coming down. I've given myself 3 weeks. I had a little rotunda at the bottom of my house. And she said, I'm going to stay here 3 weeks. Every day we're going to write, and we're going to get this book written. It needs to be out there for people. So, and she, that was a gift. She didn't charge me for her time, but she just wanted the book out there. So she's got a real passion for the essences, and that's Mari who's written the Animal Healing book. Okay. Now, Blossom Planet was written by a friend of mine in Austria. She did a white light essence workshop, and in the workshop, Sonia got a message that she had to do a book to introduce the essences to children, but the book should be also for adults. And this is just a beautiful book and great photos in there. So it's a Blossom Planet. It was nice how it came through one of the workshops as well. Now, later in the course, we'll be talking about how do you choose the remedies you're going to put in the bottle for the person you want to prescribe for, or how to, even for yourself, for example. And the insight cards are a nice diagnostic tool. We'll go into more detail, but basically there's a photo of each of the 69 flowers in there, and you can use it for determining what essences would be good for people. Now those very same 69 images are also on in a poster form. You get 4 posters, and some people like putting them up on their clinic wall or in their bedroom, so you can get people to look up and see which flower they're drawn to. We also have newsletters. The very first newsletter was hard copy, and it came out in 1988. Okay. And it used to come out quarterly with subscription, and it stayed hard copy up until 2016 when we went digital. And again, it was on a quarterly basis. In 2018, we started producing it on a monthly basis, and we let go of the subscription. It was free. So on the first Monday of the month, there's an update from me. On the second Monday of the month, there's a video with testimonials. And on the third Monday, we usually will have an article on education. And it's free, you just need to be on the database. And if being involved in this webinar, we'll have already had your details, so you'll be on that mailing list. But if you have friends who want it, then let them go to the website, sign up, and you get it. Now, we love doing stories about how people are working with the essences as well. We've had stories of people using the essences in making food commercially. One woman was making clothes for people. She would actually grow the fiber, would dye it, and then design it for the person. She was putting the essences in there. Lots of different stories. One woman from Spain, she was traveling to the Greek islands to bring essences to the Syrian refugees. We put a number of photos of her with the people she was helping. So if you're using the essences, we'd love to get a story from you. How are you using them? How are you incorporating them? You don't have to be a practitioner. And on that, we also love receiving testimonials. And so we put them out in the newsletters, and we use them for our research. We have staff designated just dealing with the testimonials. So they're classified in the condition they're treating, and also, secondly, what essences are being used. So, it's a great resource, and we've been collecting this for over, 35 years. So we've got a great collection of information, but we really appreciate you taking the time to send it in. And of course, if you want a certificate, an advanced certificate, then you just need to send in the case history, and you get all that information, what's required in the portal as well for that. And to finish off with a nice image to complete our session, this is shot in Catajuta. It's not only the physical centre of Australia, but I feel it's very much a spiritual centre of Australia as well. And I took this photo with slide film many years ago. When I got it developed, I realised I actually captured a very interesting feature here, which I call the landscape angel of Catajuta. And if you look, you can see the hair, the head, the nose, the chin. Coming down, you've got the wings, the torso, you've got the thigh, and then at the knee, the leg is bent underneath. And to give you a perspective, the 2 rocks you can see around the centre, be around that torso area, they're over 10 metres tall. So it gives you a sense of the perspective. And I do a lot of work in this area, and I know why I'm so drawn to it. Okay, so look forward next week, session 2. We're starting with our essences, and we've got some nice demonstrations to show how the essences work as well. So have a great week. See you in session 2 next week.